This is another installment of Road to Top 500. I haven't published one of these series videos in a while, mostly because I was quite busy with uni work, and also because I'm extremely lazy, but that's a bit less besides the point. One small thing about these games is that they are a little bit outdated. These games happened a while back, so now that I'm doing the commentary over them, I might have not the perfect memory of what happened or what was my thinking. But I didn't wanna get rid of too much content as well, given that I'm now uh, played quite a few games since, so I wanted to encapsulate the general progression in those weeks of what happened. Um, just something to keep in mind, I guess. So the first game is Rus versus French. This build order that I'm doing now is a bit obsolete now in the current well, I mean, it's still very similar, it's just that there are some minor differences, mainly in the number of scouts that I've gotten. The original opener, I think, is more than fine. You go on all on food, one to make a hunting cabin and rally a worker to help him. Then everything else afterwards goes on food. Your first unit is a scout, and then you produce one scout from the hunting cabin. Those two villagers then make a house and a lumber mill, and then you go around hunting deers, getting wolves, etc. with your scouts. Now, previously, before the scout nerf came in, when the scouts were 60 food instead of 70, it was much more acceptable to go for a way high number of scouts. And I don't think it's gonna have a huge impact, especially at the lower rankings, to go for an additional scout. But these are heavy investments. Each scout that you make early on is, in this case, minus 70 to your age up, so that is quite a considerable amount of food that you could have gotten towards your age up, delaying it for 15-20 seconds. So um, it is probably not the greatest idea to do that anymore after the scout nerf and the cost increase, but at the time it was more than common to do so. So yeah, you like always want to get to 250 bounty at least from the early game hunting, which I do manage, mostly because my opponent hasn't been the greatest at clearing out wolves or deer camps so far. Now, I'm not sure what my exact plan was for this game at the time. Obviously, versus French, you probably want to just go into the late game as Rus, so your plan is to just survive and not die, which sounds a lot easier than often is, but I guess that will be the general plan. Also, getting the faster H3 and securing some relics would probably be quite beneficial as well. Now we are aging up. We are probably a bit slower than the French, if the French is doing a decent build order. We've gotten a view of most of the map. What's important is to get the positions of the relics, because you don't want to spend your time looking to explore the map when you have hunts to pick up and scout what your opponent is doing. So it's obviously best to do that in the Dark Age, when you know exactly there's not much variation what your opponent is doing, and you don't have anything else to do with your scout. So I just put in some light pressure on this gold. Not planning to achieve anything with that. We know where 4 of the relics are, so there's still 1 unknown relic on the map. If I were to guess, both of these seem to be mirrored relics so far, so it should be probably somewhere on the north to west side of the map, where one of my scouts is right now. Yeah, somewhere around there. That would make the most sense to me. Right, now that we got our age up, I'm gonna instantly get a barracks going for, well, obvious reasons I'm playing versus the French. This is a bit blind, but I think it is, while probably not necessary, it is beneficial and probably can, can be. Yeah, I don't know if it's much of a mistake to do this. Essentially, I think it is a bit of it's a very small gamble, I would say. I also missed one move from them up just a bit earlier, but yeah, I think it's fair to say that in majority of your games, at least the French is going to build at least a few knights. So building a blind barracks against it is not the worst idea you can have. So I just want to, and there's a knight coming over just to prove my point. I find the 5th relic, which is actually makes the relics way more favored to me. Well, way. We have 2 relics that are close to us, and the relic that is up to contest is a bit closer to me because the wood lines don't intersect the direct path towards it. So it's just slightly favored towards me, but that slight favoredness is huge given Rus's warrior monks. So I just want to essentially, my plan currently is to just make enough units to survive. I don't want to make more units than my opponent, or at least spend more money on units than my opponent. Knights are heavy investments in units because they cost gold, which is a heavy investment into units. Food and gold are the 2 sources that you need to age up. So if you make units that are food and gold, it means that you are heavily delaying your age up, as opposed to spearmen, which are not do not cost gold, so they're a bit less costly when you're looking to age up. Yeah. So I catch his work moving out, probably to make a town, to make a outpost. My workers are running out of sheep. Probably would have been nice if I started ferrying this deer a bit earlier, but it's not too huge of a deal, I would say. That scout is probably gonna end up getting picked off. I was gonna try to send my spears to intercept, but don't think that's gonna do much. Still wanna, you always wanna, assert yourself as if you are in a position that you aren't. If in this case, like, I'm not planning to build many units, but I want to showcase all of the units I have, just to make my opponent think that I'm building a shitload of units, so he doesn't need to worry about me aging up anytime soon. While in reality, I'm kind of cutting spearmen at this point and just waiting to age up. Like, I'm still building them, I guess, a little bit, but it's not a huge influx of spearmen. I'm constantly cutting them here and there. So yeah, my spearmen are at this point a bit out of position. I was looking for the outpost that I saw. Well, I was looking for the signs of worker and whatever he was building, which I would assume would be the outpost, but couldn't find it. I do have a few spearmen at home, but yeah, okay. So I moved back my spearmen to be more in position, and now at 9 minutes I've got my age up, which is a decent time, I think, given that I did make a few spearmen. It obviously can be faster if you don't have any production going, but couldn't really afford to do that. A small mistake, well, somewhat of a large mistake, I would say, to make here is that I don't continuously scout my opponent. My opponent could have added 2 archery ranges and went for a push with rams at this point, and I would have no clue, which is obviously not great, though that tends not to be the play from the French versus Rus. Now my spearmen are out of position because I put all of them to deal with that, when in reality I really didn't need that many there. So luckily my opponent is overly scared of my TC, and I feel like he could have disturbed me a lot more than he did, so that's nice. He's gonna be a bit annoying here. He should be able to get that house, but doesn't really achieve too much in the end. It's just a slight annoyance more than anything. yeah, the house goes down. But now that I got H3, I want to start spamming out warrior monks to start collecting the relics. I don't quite remember if this is before or after the warrior monk nerf, where the movement speed is reduced during um, when they have a relic on them. Um, but even if it is, I will have a lot of good relics to go after, and I have only seen um, knights from my opponent, and if he was to build another unit, it would be archers, so I really doubt he will have spearmen out to contest my knights, which I'm now building, and I do confirm indeed that he's adding in archers now. Now this is a bit too late for him to be adding archers. I'm now H3, and I mean my knights could have come in earlier to play, but at H3 I'm rather going to be adding horse archers, or well, mainly most people do add horse archers. I don't. I have a few biases that are probably not the healthiest, and one of those biases is I do not quite like horse archers. Now I probably should have already had another monk going in production tab. So yeah, this was after the patch where the warrior monks got low movement speed. So I was I thought he would see me earlier, so I just waited around him, and now I'm able to get my relic back up. Again, I think he has a big enough knight count to contest this. Obviously, I can be a bit annoying with Wololo. But yeah, I think my opponent has pretty poor micro. He done about 0 damage to my spearman while I almost killed his knight. So it is quite poor the way he microed that fight, which is good for me. So I get my first relic. Again, my second warrior monk I think is coming out way too late. I think at this point I should have had my second warrior monk, which would have been now picking up my second relic. And then by the time my first monk gets back with second relic, I would have already gotten 3 relics, which is already nice because that's more than half of the relics. Now, my opponent made another mistake, which is, as French, you probably really want to go for professional scouts. That's the one. I don't know why I couldn't think of that. But yeah, as French, you probably want to go for professional scouts, and he did not. And not only did he not go for it, he did not go for the deer camp at all. Now it might have been risky to go for the deer camp if without the help of professional scouts, but it's definitely something worth doing, one way or the other. Now I luckily spot out his army, which is very helpful for me. This relic has been a bit annoying to pick up. In this case, rotating usually helps. It is kind of stupid that you are unable to pick it up because, well, warrior monk cannot exactly collect from a tree, but it is what it is. Now my workers are quite exposed in the bottom left there, which could be a problem, but I'm okay with that risk. I don't think my opponent is particularly good. Excuse me. And he has he decided to go for the safe berries instead of the deer. Again, they would have, but if he wanted to be a bit more safe and get the berries first because they're close to his base, first of all, he sure went for the top left berries of his base, which leads to a deer camp up top with a relic. So not only is it close to his base, it is closer to other sources of food. So at this point, I'm not too worried. My opponent doesn't seem to be too well versed in plain French at least, and I'm already 3 relics up on my opponent. Since I spotted those villagers earlier, I decided to go for a small run by. I'm keeping tabs on my opponent's army, which is always nice. This should force some sort of response from my opponent, rather to go back or to start pushing. Well, it doesn't have to, but usually it does, and it's always good if it does. If I cannot do much more damage, which in that case I probably couldn't, it's actually the correct call for my opponent to not do anything. But so yeah, now he's adding in some more I assume he went for 1-1-1, one barracks, one archery range, and one stable, with the one stable being his age up tech. And now I'm trying to just micro around his PS, trying to pick off archers. I don't believe that was a very efficient fight for me. I think I lost a shitload more than my opponent did, but what can you do? So now he's kind of pushing towards me, and it does seem like a formidable army to fight at the moment. I do have a nice gold income, which probably means I could have, yeah, I moved my units away. Probably could have moved them towards the berries, since I'm currently mostly lacking food for production, unless I want to go into a siege. But the reason why I did that there is because I wanted to drop down another monastery so that I can drop off my relic, and then I would not have had enough or a lot of wood left over. So it's not the worst decision, I guess. Now I'm just spamming out of my barracks and my stable. I should have a better production than my opponent, just because of the relics that I've gotten. I'm able to now ignore gold completely and just focus on getting knight and spearman. I think it's a decent unit composition that I have. His one is worse because it includes more unit types, I would say. Like it might be better if he like micros really well, but as we haven't seen that so far, I don't think that's the case. I let my spearman get on top of the archers, which I could have probably microed a bit better to get on top of the knights. But if spearman go on top of the archers, it's not a horrible trade, especially if the archers aren't microed back. Now my reinforcement comes. I have a few mana times in the mix, which I really like for me. And this fight is, while probably not the most efficient for me, it is a one fight, which means that I will go on probably to win the game, and my opponent realizes that and taps out, given that I have a 4-1 relic advantage. So the next game is going to be an Abbasid mirror, played on ancient spires. Now, Abbasid has been my favorite civ, or one of my most favorite civs to play for a while. Very recently they got quite strongly buffed, and now they're quite meta, but this was just early days of that happening. It wasn't as supreme at the time, and also it is mainly played on non-hybrid maps. This is one of the only hybrid maps that is isolated, so the water is not connected to other major intersections of water, like say Danube River. So in this case, this is one of my favorite, like this map particularly I don't like too much, but if I do get it, I really enjoy playing Abbasid on it. So yeah, going for 4 workers on wood, 1 to build a farm next to the berries, rally onto berries, 1 send out 1 to build a dock. Now on at least on this map, I really like going for double docks with Abbasid, given that how cheap the docks are. Also, this is a very interestingly spawned fish around this pond. Yeah, so I think it's quite beneficial to go for double dock with Abbasid, as that is as expensive as getting a single dock for any other civ, and by sacrificing your age up time by only around, I would say, 15 to 20 seconds, maybe a bit more, you can get a double dock economy going somewhat reasonably. I have no clue why I decided to bother that wolf, but that's what happens, I guess. I've gotten the forestry upgrade, which as of late I've decided it's not as a great of investment. It's a very cheap upgrade. However, I don't know how useful it is in actuality, given that it's has very minimal usage and mainly is helpful when you have large numbers of workers starting a new wood line. So it's probably better to get after you get H2, as you won't have that many workers and it won't be in effect for that long. So as my opponent got on the dock, which I wanted to go for as my second dock, I will continue scout around with the village. This is not the smartest play by far. I just guess you got kind of caught out and unlucky that my opponent was going for a dock in that location. Even though, given how little pawns I find so far, it might have not even been that unlucky and somewhat predictable in a way. So I would definitely not recommend going for this. I don't even know what to call it, but this weird build order, I guess. Another thing that I probably could have done better is my house placements. I should have placed that house to connect the mill and the TC, so I would keep the aura, and then I would be able to plop down my house of wisdom above my TC in between my gold and berries. Yeah, I was hoping that there would be one pond or body of water behind the main base of my opponent, but unlike it is for me, it does not seem to be much of the case for my opponent. I can hear him dropping down the House of Wisdom from the fog, so that's good to know about my opponent's timing. Yeah, this is quite a weird opening I have going for myself. I transitioned back on berries for a bit just so that I can get to 400, 200s around the same time, because I feel like I'm definitely going to get gold up a bit faster. Now again, this was shortly after the patch went through, so there is a lot of things I don't do well here. I feel like getting wheelbarrow, that's the one. Sometimes I just completely forget the name of things somehow, but getting wheelbarrow would have probably been better to get wheelbarrow sooner, or yeah, just get it around this ish time. I definitely don't have enough gold income currently for that. And my second and again my house placement is far from perfect. But my second dock goes up way later than I would have preferred it to have happened. So what the things that you can focus on an Abbasid mirror? The thing is, Abbasid mirror tend to be quite passive for the majority of the time, because it is really hard to deal damage as Abbasid until age 3. You can go for maybe some camel harass, but if your opponent scouts what you are doing, it's it's not going to be too effective. And camels are heavy investments early on. Well, later on they are also heavy investments, but they're incredibly strong, so it's not much of an investment when it is guaranteed to pay off. And while early game they are not incredibly strong, while still very expensive. So there's very little opportunity to really do a lot of damage early on in Abbasid matchups. So what you see in usually in Abbasid mirrors, at least at higher levels of gameplay, is that people will just try to one-up each other in terms of how much eco they're going for. You obviously, this is a hybrid map, so it is a bit different, but like in full one maps it's going to be like, well, he went for double TC, therefore I'm gonna go for 3 TCs. I'm gonna get all of the upgrades, all of the eco upgrades straight away, and etc, etc. Just doing anything that you can to one up your opponents economy wise. Now I finally decided to connect my farm to my TC. Really is a long time coming. I probably should have a few more villagers on gold, just again so that I could start doing my upgrades, as well as probably looking for age 3 myself. He goes for double archery range, which probably means double camel production, which is extremely expensive really, especially wood wise. It is quite an expensive investment. Each camel is 180 food, 60 wood, so that's 120 wood plus the 75 he has from dogs that is quite wood intensive. I would not be able to match this production, for example, due to having double dock if I want to continuously produce out of those. But again, I'm not too scared by the camels. The horsemen do just fine against them. I find they're not like with enough micro and height and mass of camels. They do deal just fine versus horsemen, but I feel like in low numbers it is totally fine to just have a mass of horsemen, and because my eco at the very least in theory should be a lot better than him, I should be able to afford to spam out more units than my opponent, making it that even if my unit is less efficient, then they should still be fine. Now here my opponent makes a mistake by building that too close to the TC, to the dock without any real purpose, as it does not, like, you should have covered the fish itself, I believe, would have been more efficient. But also I should have seen that coming a bit earlier, as I've seen the worker move, the worker move out from his base like a minute ago at this point. The thing with ancient spires, since they have quite a limited amount of fish for each pond, eventually you want to stop your dock production, as it becomes a poor investment, as you won't get much return on getting a new ship when it's only going to work for a very short amount of time. So I think about now would be the time I would want to stop getting new ships on my first dock. At least I'm not entirely sure on this, but I feel like that's kind of the feel I get. Now since my opponent also has double dock, which brings up kind of 2 points. One, that I don't think he can, at least not at the start, could properly afford the double camel production. And second of all, that maybe I should be a bit more worried about the damage that his camels could cause, as he can build up a mass of them. So it is crucial that I do indeed have these skirmishes that I'm having right now, just so that I can take down some of his camels and limit the death bow of camels that he can mass. My production should still be greater than his. He should, I doubt he can afford to go up to 3 camels production, while I am comfortably sitting on my triple horseman production. I do like this move, and going for the ships before going for the dock I think is definitely the right choice, as I think there's no way in hell I will be able to actually take down the dock, while I was able to take down one fishing boat. I have my scout in position so I can move back as soon as I see camels approaching. This attempt at getting the tower up again is very poor from him. I don't think he's aware that I can actually see if the tower has been constructed or not, and it is poor for me to lose a scout, so now I'm gonna have to make one and yeah, it's definitely not worth to produce fishing boats on my first dock anymore, but now I would need to make one scout instead of one horseman, which is not a huge deal, but it's never pretty when you lose scouts for free. I'm now able to take up to H3, and well, to be honest, my opponent, depending on what he's doing, should be able to get H3, and since he did have less production than me, it was indeed faster. I think I messed up a little bit with my worker distribution. I have way too much wood income currently, as well as too many. I already built too many ships, I feel like, or working boats on my first dock, so I definitely should have had less workers on wood initially. Would have been able to age up faster than I did. Now I'm going to be adding man at arms, or at least that will be the plan, and that is because, well, it's for multiple reasons. First of all, he previously had camels, so he's rather gonna go for man at arms himself, or double down on camels and maybe crossbowmen. If that's the case, then my horsemen are gonna do the trick just fine in terms of dealing with his army, And if that's not the case, he might go for knights, in which case barracks is definitely a good structure to have. And if he goes for barracks like he did right now, well then his army is technically a little bit better because of his ability to add in crossbowmen. Um, but and I mean, yeah, so I think that's just a mistake. Probably should have added a few archery ranges in as well. Now that fight for me was definitely quite good. I was able to pick off quite a few workers and camels, and now he decided to chase my scout instead of saving his dog, which I definitely do like for myself. So it's always nice to get rid of his dog, especially one that had access to such a large number of fish. From here on out, I should be having an equal advantage unless my opponent have snuck ATC. Though I really doubt it with how many barracks he added and how many units he was producing pretty much consistently. Now he's adding in archers and spearmen, and I mean I think spearmen is not particularly a mistake to add for him. That's nice, but archers are definitely a mistake. If anything, he should be building crossbowmen or potentially camel archers. I think crossbowmen would have been a better call because it's just what would I be adding to this composition? It's rather archers myself or crossbowmen, which doesn't make much sense with his army composition. Knights, I guess, in which case crossbowmen would probably be useful to him. And I'll continue that fight after, but yeah, this fight was definitely a pretty nice engagement for me. Knights are really, even horsemen are really nice because that's the maneuverability they have. You can often out micro your opponent even if they're a good player just because of the mobility of the units. But yes, knights are not a good unit for composition, at least as the Abbasid, just for a simple fact of they are too gold intensive heavy. Abbasid does not have an easy access to gold outside of just mining the one that exists, and as Abbasid likes to go for siege generally, it is well, gold is valuable to Abbasid, and wasting it on knights is not the greatest. While mana terms are so cheap, and even crossbowmen compared to knights are so cheap in terms of gold, those definitely are the better options than knights. Even though I do end up adding some of them, mostly because I did not really think about that at the time, and now that it's a bit further in the future, I do consider that. So yeah, if the one of the best compositions for Abbasid towards the later game is crossbowmen and mana thumbs and just whatever siege you need, so mainly springles and mangonels, maybe some rams if your opponent's castling. So yeah, my horsemen are becoming a bit more obsolete, so instead I decided to force my opponent back. Well, I don't know how much was he forced to actually go back and how much he could have actually cleaned this up with just reinforcing units, but this does two things. He sees he sees that I have a large mass of horsemen, so he might be forced to build more spears, which is good for me because while I did add in a few knights, my main composition is mana terms, which while not counter spearmen, definitely trade quite well against them. And two, it forces my opponent to rather go back or to add spearmen, which again is good for point 1, but if my opponent goes back, since I should have better eco now that I've destroyed one of his dogs, and perhaps now gonna soon be able to destroy a second one, as well as losing a lot less workers than my opponent did due to my multiple run-bys, I should be ahead economically, so if I can delay my opponent from moving out on the map and attacking me, I should have just a stronger army coming in, just a bigger army. And as my opponent now has, well, if those few archers are probably an exception, he has some archers scattered around, which is definitely not what he wants, but since he has mainly got spearmen now, my army is definitely in a good position. Now, I don't believe my opponent has any sort of cavalry, but I did add in one camel rider, I believe they're called, just in case. Again, I do not believe it's best to include um, uh, gold cavalry for Abbasid, whether it is the camel rider or the knights, or do they use lancers? I'm not sure. I believe those knights. Um, for reasons I discussed earlier, as well as like countered by an unit that is not gold intensive whatsoever, which just isn't that good for you. If you want a cavalry unit when you're playing the Abbasid, which usually you would want mainly rather to disturb the backline with crossbowmen, or to deal with the siege, just build horsemen or scouts. Scouts are a good tanky unit, so that is not very expensive. Horsemen are not that much more expensive than a scout, but are really good, again after one of the later patches, against siege. So it's it's really good. Now that fight went for me pretty well, again mainly because my opponent only had spearmen, which do not go well into an H3 army when I only have a few knights. So my opponent definitely had poor scouting over what I was doing, and due to me raiding with a horseman and him seeing a lot of horsemen, overcommitting on a unit which he should not have, I can very easily snipe that down, and this game is now as good as over. My opponent, while his docks probably would not have much fish left, at least his bottom one, his top one would have still been producing a lot of fish. And yeah, my economy is better, I'm in his base, and this is GG. The last game is going to be played on Mountain Pass, Mongol versus HRE. Now this was still during a period of time where I was still in the learning stages of Mongols. I feel like I've improved with Mongols a lot, as I have not played Mongols up until like recently at the moment of this game being played, but I think I've gotten a decent grasp of it now. Obviously that was not as much of a case at the time, but my most enjoy strategy when playing Mongols is going for the Silver Tree Boom. I prefer it a lot over just the normal gear stones into just harass into H3. I prefer doing the same thing but with a silver tree, and if my opponent gets up to H3 with more civ, it doesn't matter too much because my eco should be far more superior to my opponent. Now obviously with H3 it's the same thing for every other civ. You don't want them to be able to get 3 relics, much even 2. You can let them have 1 relic, but if they get any more than 3, it is not pretty. So the goal with Mongols is to force the HRE to invest so much into military that they would fall behind and allow me to get to H3 similar times, if not faster than HRE. That's obviously the best case scenario and the goal. Now, also my favorite opener for the Mongol is the one that I'm currently playing here as well. Going for a pasture first with a single scout. I feel like with the Mongol having delayed food eco, as you first get your uwu down and then you need the wood to get your pasture down, your eco is going to be delayed. So I really like having only a single scout opener. The pasture should kind of provide a backup in a way if you fail to find a lot of sheep, and if it's really bad you can go for the double pasture opening, so you're not really ever gonna run out of sheep, which is it's nice. It just basically changes how fast you need to go into additional pastures. This is a very heavily economic build. and as long as I'm not playing against a Mongol myself, this is my most preferred build. Versus a Mongol, I think just an early barracks and potentially into a tower rush, or just an early barracks to protect myself against one, I think is the way to go, just because Mongol is the only civ that we can have a very high chance of going for early aggression, and the easiest way to counter said early aggression is to just have units of your own to deal with it. So yeah, I've gotten a decent amount of sheep, given that I've only used one scout. Could have been a bit better. I'm going to go into pastures, I would say at around 15-minute mark, like adding the one or two pastures before that, and then going heavily at the 15-minute mark. So I mean, obviously I can find some more sheep before that, but for now that's how it looks like. And now I'm going to be going up with a silver tree. Now there's no real need to really push through your age up if you're going for the DS but with a silver tree there might be a small reason to get it a bit faster, and that's just because you're gonna get your traders started a bit faster. Now this is, let's see, yeah, I do believe my opponent ended up losing it. No? Okay. He was able to sneak through. It would have been quite huge if my opponent was to lose his scout there. He didn't have a lot of sheep, but just, you know, it's always not good to lose a scout early on. Now also, I believe I don't do the reasonable thing of placing my silver tree next to the uwu, which is what you should do if you're going for the silver tree. You should place it next to the uwu and then trade with the furthest market. Obviously not every map has multiple markets, so sometimes that's not going to be your you're not going to have such a variety of options, but you basically just want to trade with start trading and just produce as many traders as you can. Following that, you want to once you get to an amount that you're comfortable with, I would say 30 to 40. You can go up higher. I don't think you should have it less than 30, but you can definitely go up to like 60 if you really feel like it. At that point, you move it to the edge of the map, or corresponds to the longest distance that you can afford to from the market, so that you generate the most amount of income. Now here, obviously I don't do that, because yeah, once again, my Mongol wasn't the most it wasn't my best civ, to say the least. But yeah, that is what I would have done so far. Now I'm going to be adding manga dice, and again this is probably what you want to do instead is to throw down a stable and to maybe even a double stable, and to produce units out of that, as you don't cost gold, and so it makes it easier to saturate them while not delaying your age up as much. Now my opponent went for professional scouts, which is going to delay his age up at least a little bit. Now horsemen are also faster than the Khan, so I'll probably end up losing my Khan here eventually. This should get taken out by the TC anyways, but I do dedicate work to it, even though I don't think that's what's necessary, as it should get taken out by the TC. Here my Khan does end up going down. Khan going down is, I would say, at least in this stage of the game, is not too huge of a deal. It's mostly an annoyance. I'll be kind of scouting his base anyway, regardless of the fact, so it makes it easier to fight against him if I can see a bit further than the manga I can, but it is not necessary to have a Khan to harass with this. Now I think manga dice are somewhat useless, in a matter of fact. I don't think they're a great unit. They can be nice, especially at lower ranks, but at higher ranks they're just not that good. They do get countered by archers, and they cost gold, which is not ideal, and you cannot really mass them. I mean, if you do, you're just gonna end up getting countered. So I just microed off my trader just so it doesn't die. Here I just want to apply pressure mostly on his gold. I see he's already going up with H3, so I want to delay this as much as possible, which I don't think I really can, but my opponent basically allows me to as he pulls back. I think he could have, like, he would have lost a worker or two, or maybe even three, additionally. But he would have gotten age up, which I think is more important than losing said workers. So I think that was a bad call by my opponent. As if he got an age up, I'm not sure if he had already prelates around the map, but if he had prelates around the map, he could have already picked up and started bringing relics back. Obviously, the problem with that would have been that potentially I would be able to snipe down the prelates with my Mangadai, as he doesn't seem to have too many units, given that he went for professional scouts and he already hit H3. So currently he should not have too many units. So my goal here is to just try to go for an age up as early as I can now myself, while still applying enough pressure so that my opponent doesn't finish his age up, or if he does, to prevent him from getting relics. So currently I'm more or less just spamming Mangadai. I think do I spam them regardless? Let's see. Yeah, spam them regardless if I can build two of them or not. But I think it would have been perhaps better to only build them when I could have the double production with the stone. You know, my opponent's pushing me back, so I want to make sure that he is not building behind it. He's also making another mistake of losing his archers here, as he really wants to build up a mass of them before going against me. Now here I missed macro a bit. I was trying to macro behind it, and I could have taken out the archer a bit sooner, but my opponent doesn't seem too interested in pulling it back, so that's not too much of an issue. Yeah, the main problem here is I need to macro back up at home, and I'm struggling to do that currently while macroing at the front. I probably should have sent a few more workers on gold as well, just so that I can hit my age up a bit faster. My villagers are running out of anything to gather food from. Another mistake from my opponent, I believe, is that if he wanted to not finish it up in such a way that was punishable by me, he could have just, at this point, multiple minutes have passed since he put that landmark down. I believe at least 2 minutes. It's been at least 2 minutes since he placed down the landmark, and I think it would have been way more efficient for my opponent to have just cancelled it and placed it right next to his TC, such that I would not be able to harass it much, as my Mangadai are not very armored against range, so the TC would absolutely melt them if I were to try to contest that. So there's multiple mistakes my opponent makes, which allows me to come out a bit on top. I think a better opponent would have just finished the H3 landmark a lot faster, immediately without pulling out any workers, or otherwise just cancel it and build it under the safety of his TC, which would have made him age up a lot faster than I did. And now that I am H3, I can well, yeah, the Mongols, big advantage of Mongols is their siege engineering, being able to improve siege engineering, I believe it's called, allowing you to produce siege out on the map. And now I don't have the best units for that, given I've added two stables, but I still have an archery range, which I could use to produce archers or crossbowmen, so that I will be able to do so. Now I know where most of the relics are. I don't know where one relic is, and he has now picked up one relic above his base. I'm fine with allowing him one relic. I prefer if he wouldn't get the second relic, even though I assume the second relic is probably in the middle of the map, in the fog of war where I haven't scouted yet. I would be really surprised if it's next to the Diakam in the southwest-ish area. So as long as I protect this region, he should not be able to really pick up those relics. And as long as he only has one relic, I'll be really happy. If he has two, less so. But with my trade, I should still be ways ahead of my opponent. So I would definitely be able to age up a lot faster were my opponent, were I to be going for the DS instead of the silver tree. But I would have been still outmatched by the relic gathering of my opponent. If my opponent was to be any good, he would have still gotten those two relics as he did right now, even earlier than I did, but I wouldn't have nothing to rival his gold income. Now I do have something like that. This is somewhat similar to how Beastie played against the Muslim. Now Beastie did lose in that game against the Muslim. However, this is a much more defendable position. First of all, the H3 was way worse handled by my opponent here than the Muslim did, and the map is just a much more defensive map. As for a market, the map that they played on was Hillendale. This is French Pass, which makes it a lot easier to defend that. So now I'm adding in a few mana terms, mostly to produce the said siege out on the map. And my plan hasn't changed so far whatsoever. I just want to deny my opponent getting the rest of the relics. Now that now he gotten 2 relics, it's not ideal, but my gold income should be better than his. So if I can prevent him from getting the rest of the relics, I'll be happy. Now my opponent has a large mass of archers, which, well, it's not going to work too well for my opponent. My opponent is able to produce the units of the same caliber as I did. Now another thing that I like here is that I've made a lot of knights, well, a sizable amount of knights, and have now showed them to my opponent. So hopefully my opponent will now start producing spearmen, which won't do him much good with the units I'm going to be building. I'm probably going to still mix in a few knights, but I'm going to be adding a lot of mana arms and some crossbowmen. So it's not going to be too helpful for my opponent to have those spearmen. It's always a nice thing that if you are able to do, your opponent will always try. Well, obviously, you know, they can sometimes if your opponents are smart, they can look further in and see if they can counter what you might be building afterwards. But due to the lack of the scouting that he has, I don't think it's reasonable for him to assume that we'll be adding that much of other units than knights, given how he only seen knights. At best, you might think I might have crossbowmen since I had Mongolites earlier. Now I'm really starting to run out of food, so that's why I'm adding pastures. I really should be adding a few more pastures at this point, and using the silver tree to trade my resources a bit, so that I would have more food and wood to do what I want. Now I already gotten the siege engineering up, and indeed I'm making a mangonel, which again, that's another point of advantage that I have over my opponent. I definitely bring in a lot more gold per minute than his 2 relics do, and I did not require to produce a siege workshop to create these siege, while my opponent will require one, and I doubt he has built one yet, as he probably would be first focusing on massing units, given how I killed most of his army, if not all of his army already. This makes it a very safe push into his base, as I doubt he has any springles out just now. He has a few knights, crossbowmen, so his army is not too bad against mine, but my army just has a bigger size, and still he has multiple archers in it, which are as good as useless at this current time. They do alright versus crossbows, but they won't be hitting crossbows. So I want to avoid my opponent destroying my trebuchet. I don't care too much about the mangonel, as I'm not too particularly scared about my opponent forces. But the trebuchet allows me to work through my opponent quite easily, as well as giving me the bounty for the raid bounty, I believe it's called, for destroying his landmark. Okay, and that's basically going to be game. Starting MMR was 1383 and we finished around 1400. That's going to be it for this episode.